So every species has a preferred diet or fuel that it runs most optimally on, and that's based on evolution. Does it always work out? Probably not. I don't think we're ever going to mimic a diet that our ancestors consumed, but trying to eat something closest to it probably does make a lot of sense. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host, Evan Centopani, and this is AMA Ask Me Anything. Just something a little different for you today. Had a couple of questions pertaining to different dieting, let's call them diet methodologies. People talking about if it fits your macros, the carnivore diet. And I said, why don't we do an episode where we go through a number of them. Now, probably too many to list, even though I did sit here and I made a list. I think I covered probably the more common ones, right? So what do we got? We got if it fits your macros, keto diet, carnivore diet, vegan diet, paleo diet, carb cycling, and intermittent fasting. And I thought I would try to give you guys my most unbiased opinion of these various methodologies. And you want to know something? There's probably something to be said for each of them. I'm not going to sit here and totally bag any of them. Maybe veganism. That's kind of lame. But let's touch on the good and the bad of each, shall we? And I guess at the end, I'm going to give you what I would consider to be probably my most ideal way of dieting. Now, first and foremost, when we talk about dieting, right, are we talking about pre-contest dieting? Are we talking about off-season? For the sake of this video, let's cover the whole thing, right? Let's just speak broadly and say if I were going to stick to one type of dieting methodology, no, you know what? Let's talk about someone whose goal is to get in shape. Because let's be serious, when people diet, most of the time, right, when you're going to follow a strict diet, usually we're talking about an attempt to get in optimal shape. Right, now, optimal shape can mean a lot of different things. We're going to talk about optimal aesthetic shape, right? Visually, cosmetically. We're not going to talk necessarily about performance, although there's definitely an overlap, right? There's just this form precede function or this function precede form, but the two are definitely heavily intertwined. So there's going to be overlap, but let's talk about someone who wants to get in the best shape. Let's start with if it fits your macros. Haven't heard a lot about if it fits your macros lately, but a few years ago it was wildly popular. And as is the case with any methodology, it can become bastardized, right? People can take things to extremes. Now, the way I understand if it fits your macros is that it was intended, right? The idea behind it was that it could serve as a flexible means of dieting, right? So if you fall within your given macro needs, your carbs, proteins, fats, as long as you hit those numbers each day, and I think there's rules to it, right? You're supposed to consume a certain amount of fiber. I'm not sure if there's parameters put on things like sugar intake or omega-3 intake or things like that, right? Things that would speak to the quality of the macronutrients that you're consuming. And yes, I do say the quality because people want to say, well, it's just as long as you're hitting the macros, that's all that matters. No, it's not all that matters. That's like saying a calorie is a calorie. From a thermal standpoint, sure, a calorie is a calorie, but you and I both know that if two people were to consume 3,000 calories a day, if I were able to clone myself, so we have the exact same Evan Centopani, and he did the exact same thing as the other Evan Centopani every day, same diet, same training. Let's just say you had two Evan Centopanis, right? You cloned me and there was another identical me. And we both do the same amount of cardio, the same type of cardio, the same training. All of it is the same. And we consume 3,000 calories a day each. However, this Evan Centopani consumes those 3,000 calories from what he considers to be a balanced amount of carbs, proteins, and fats. And then the other Evan Centopani consumes 3,000 calories solely from Drake's cakes and ho-hos and ding-dongs. Obviously, those 3,000 calories are not equal. Maybe from a thermodynamic standpoint, as if to say the two Evan Centopanis will, at the end of it all, both be the same weight. But we both know, and even that, I don't know if I believe it. But let's just say that we're true, right? Let's assume that's true. our composition is going to be very different. So a calorie in that sense is not just a calorie, and all calories are not created equal. And I also believe that not all macros are created equal, right? Because let's look at proteins. There's such things as complete proteins. There's such things as incomplete proteins. And you could be obtaining your macros from some really shitty sources. So people will make fun of bodybuilders when they talk about clean foods, things like that. I think you understand what we're getting at when we use the term clean. We're talking about quality sources of calories and macronutrients. And no, they're not all the same. So if it fits your macros, right, if you're going to allow a person a degree of flexibility, as if to say, well, you know what, if you want to obtain 50 grams of protein from chicken or from turkey or from fish, or steak, right, as long as your total macros for the day are the same, then you're good. And you want to know something? That's probably true, okay? And if allowing a person that amount of flexibility is going to be the difference between a person remaining compliant or totally falling off the wagon, I think that giving them that flexibility is certainly a great idea. Of course, what if it fits your macros kind of turned into was like this contest to hit your macros, but still afford yourself all this like crap. Now again, I don't know the exact principles of if it fits your macros, so people doing that could have been bastardizing it, right? That may not be what was intended by, and I don't even know who created if it fits your macros, or maybe it's just kind of a movement. But I think when it becomes a contest to see basically how much garbage you can eat but still hit your macros for the day, I don't know. I think that's kind of ridiculous. I don't think there should be such an attempt to avoid consumption of good foods. And yeah, I mean, there is a difference in foods. I don't think all foods are good. I think that some stuff is just shit. And I think the sooner you make your peace with the idea that you should be consuming good foods, I think the better off you're going to be in the long run. And I think people are under this presumption that, well, you know, if having this garbage keeps me sane, blah, blah, blah. I can understand that to an extent, but sometimes the more you kind of just, you refuse to let go of that shit, the worse it is. I ate a certain way for so long, right? Eating such plain foods, right? Not going out of my way to maybe even season my foods a lot. And from eating a certain way, eating so strictly for so long, it did me a favor in the sense that if I go and I have an apple, right, that's like a treat. Because I'm like, wow, this apple, it's amazing. It's so sweet, it's so juicy, it's crunchy. Wow, this is amazing. I no longer need all this garbage to feel satisfied. And I think if people are more willing to dedicate themselves to just the consumption of quality foods and saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to consume this food. I'm going to make my peace with it. I believe in it. It's wholesome food, and it's going to help my body, and it's going to help me achieve my goals. People talk about having a positive relationship with food. I think that is very much a positive relationship with food. I think having this undying need to consume garbage, I don't think that is a healthy relationship with food, and finding all these ways to excuse or forgive the consumption of it. And I think we should all treat ourselves here and there. But I think if daily it turns into a contest to consume as much crap as you can, I don't know. It's not for me, and it's not something I would advocate. But again, that may not be what was originally intended. That may just be what it turned into. Let's talk about the keto diet. The keto diet, I ran several years getting ready for shows. I turned pro in 2007 running a keto diet. And do I think there's any magic there? At the time I did, you know, but as I went on and I tried other approaches to dieting, I think the ketogenic diet is good in some regards. I think because end up eliminating a large amount of carbohydrates, pretty much most of them, you tend to fill your diet with more vegetables. I think that's a positive. And you tend to consume more fatty acids. And I think a lot of people do feel better when they consume good fats. When you look at carbs, proteins, and fats in nature, let's consider the fact that there is no such thing as an essential starch or an essential sugar or an essential carbohydrate, right? There's only essential amino acids and essential fatty acids. Even look at an egg, right? A chicken egg. that's essentially an embryo. It contains quite a bit of protein, quite a bit of fat, some vitamins, minerals, but it's void of carbohydrates. So if an egg, right, is an embryo, and that contains all of the nutrients that are needed for a chick to develop and grow, it should say something about the value of proteins and fats, and about maybe the idea that carbohydrates aren't necessarily vital. Now, I do believe that carbohydrates have their place, right? Especially if you're an athlete, even if you're a bodybuilder, carbohydrates are a calorie source. And the consumption of the consumption of carbohydrates can obviously spare proteins. Consuming carbohydrates, your body definitely likes running off of carbohydrates, especially in certain instances. So the consumption of carbohydrates, I definitely think, has a place. When it comes to people claiming that they feel better on a ketogenic diet, I think for a lot of people that is true. Now, let's be serious. It's like when people begin a vegan diet, they pronounce how much better they feel. Well, in a lot of cases, people went from eating a lot of processed garbage, a lot of shit, to cleaning up their diet, consuming more whole foods, less processed junk, drinking more water, doing more positive things all around. So is it the diet per se? Is it the specific type of diet, whether it's a vegan diet or a keto diet or a carnivore diet? Or is it the fact that you simply cleaned things up? Maybe also you're eating within a certain calorie range. And let's be honest, when you are eating in a calorie deficit, in a lot of instances, just eating in a calorie deficit, people start to feel better. Inflammation usually begins to decrease. I've dieted, I've done the keto diet, I've done, I've carb cycled, and I could tell you that anytime I'm in a calorie deficit, I feel better. So you have to be careful, I think, to make certain assumptions. But I think, for certain individuals, it has been shown that a ketogenic diet, especially, it's been shown in kids who have epileptic seizures, following a ketogenic diet could reduce the incidence of those seizures. People with certain injuries, or I do believe that in certain instances, a ketogenic diet could be more applicable. And it seems that some people find a ketogenic diet easier to stick to, that once they get rid of carbohydrates and they're in a state of ketosis, they find that a lot of their cravings dissipate and they just feel good. Now, I think that's all fine. The one thing that I found when doing ketogenic diets, I felt like my metabolism took a beating. I felt that it started to almost become more difficult to get in shape the longer I was on it. Whereas when I would do things like carb cycling, I felt like my body was just burning more all the time and I would get in shape a little bit more effortlessly. So ketogenic diet, I think it has its pluses. I think it also has its drawbacks. The drawbacks being, I think it kind of beats up on your metabolism. But again, is the consumption of quite a bit of proteins, good fats, lots of vegetables, is that a good thing? Yeah, definitely. Carnivore diet, right? I guess the carnivore diet is just the consumption of meat. I guess I would go for it probably before veganism, but I still think that the consumption of vegetables and plant matter is beneficial. I do think that meat is very important. When, if you believe that you are what you eat, then kind of by default, you have to believe that you are what you eats. And now, not all things are perfect, right? We live in a time where things are farm raised. But let's just say a cow is being fed a grass-fed diet. It's being fed grass. And that cow has essentially turned pounds and pounds and pounds of grass into flesh. The cow is basically an ultra-concentrated source of grass. You can't consume grass, and I can't consume grass, but the cow can. And he consumed lots of it, because let's be honest, grass is a pretty inefficient way to eat. You have to consume a lot of it. And the cow did us the favor of already doing it all and converting it into tissue. And that tissue is way more, right? If you look at 8 ounces of steak versus 8 ounces of, when I say grass, let's say, leafy green matter, I'm starving in the woods. Right? Or I have to survive on a pound, let's call it a pound of food a day. Right? Let's just use a generic weight allocation. Guess what I'm choosing? Am I going to choose a pound of spinach or a pound of kale? No, I'm definitely going to choose a pound of meat. I'm pretty sure you're going to get a lot more calories, proteins, fats, vitamins, minerals. Look, kale, I think, is a great food. Spinach, great stuff. I'd rather eat the steak and the spinach. You know what I mean? Why would I have to eliminate one or the other? So carnivore diet, again, I think a lot of people way over consume carbohydrates. They don't consume enough protein. And when they switch to a diet like carnivore, they feel better. But did they have to go to that extreme? Probably not, which leads into veganism again. Now, I'm not an archaeologist, but as I understand it, mankind's development really propelled itself forward once he learned how to hunt. I'm pretty sure that once man learned how to hunt, brain size increased dramatically. Meat compared to vegetables, it's a powerhouse. It is. And I think if you want to make the decision to consume less animal foods, maybe you just have a feeling, you know what? I don't need all this animal protein. I feel good if I consume more plant matter, vegetables, things like that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But to say, never again am I ever going to have an egg or a piece of fish or anything like that, I think it's fucking absurd. Like, why? I think if your stance is maybe the consumption of animals grosses you out, right? Or you're just such an animal lover, you feel so terrible about it, you just can't bring yourself to do it. Okay, you can't really argue with that. But if you argue it from a health standpoint, I'm sorry, I think it's absurd. Maybe once a week you say, I'm going to have an egg, I'm going to have a piece of fish, or maybe I'm going to have 4 ounces of red meat. And a lot of vegans crave that stuff, right? That's why they're forever eating all this fake processed shit that they try to make it look and taste and smell like meat because they miss it. So if you miss it that much and your body's craving it, it's probably something valuable in there. Now, I don't believe that the consumption of animals is unhealthy. Quite the opposite. I think a lot of it can be kind of health food. And I think, if I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have a steak, I probably want to have a salad with it or some nice greens with it. So I don't see why people have to go to such extremes or, say, I'm going to eliminate meat or I'm going to eliminate vegetables. I think both are equally stupid, though veganism I think is extra stupid. Paleo diet. Paleo diet sounds pretty logical. I don't know how accurate the whole thing is, but I guess the premise being you're going to consume foods, really that man has been consuming for the duration of his evolution, I suppose, or maybe the best parts of his evolution. The idea being you wouldn't want to consume things that our bodies don't do well with. Because let's be honest, look at the past 100 years with all the developments that have been made in the food processing industry and even the genetic modification of foods, the overuse of certain pesticides and various chemicals. Probably safe to say that the body is not equipped to deal with or effectively process a lot of this stuff. And the thing that probably does make the most sense in figuring out what is best for us, what is most ideal for us, because let's be honest, every species has a preferred diet. Just as you wouldn't put diesel in a gasoline engine, you wouldn't give deer, I guess you wouldn't feed certain food to deer or to dogs or to, fish. So every species has a preferred diet or fuel that it runs most optimally on, and that's based on evolution. So I guess the idea behind paleo is to consume foods that align best with our evolution. And that's, I think, logical. I think that makes sense. Does it always work out? Probably not. I mean, chickens are a domesticated animal. They're being fed corn. Same thing with cattle. They're being fed corn and, GMO garbage. Fish, right? Fish are wild, assuming they're not farm raised. But even there's things in the ocean that don't belong there. So I don't think we're ever going to mimic a diet that our ancestors consumed, but trying to eat something closest to it probably does make a lot of sense. So I think paleo probably does make a lot of sense. I'm not sure what the stance is on carbohydrate intake, meaning, probably root vegetables are okay. It probably says no grain. And, a lot of grain probably isn't great for you, and just carbohydrates in general. Aside from serving as a calorie source, I don't think you really need them for much. They provide calories, and I think they can stoke your metabolism. And they taste good, and they're cheap. Outside of that, they're not very nutritious. You get the most amount of nutrition from proteins and from fats. But carbs, I guess they're good, cheap fun, and obviously they're delicious. But I do believe that they support the metabolism. Carb cycling. Now, carb cycling is probably my favorite. So if I were to pick an optimal way to diet, right, for say a contest or to look my absolute best, I would probably combine, a paleo approach with carb cycling, right? Paleo, I would try to consume foods that aren't going to work against me, right? That my body processes well. They don't create any type of response in my body that's not helpful. And carb cycling, I've had great success with. When you're trying to get in the best shape you can, generally you're going to keep protein fairly high, and you're going to manipulate fats and carbohydrates. Kind of doing one of these, and both carb cycling and I guess technically calorie cycling. I mean, the greatest success I've had getting in shape would come from me pushing myself, right? With a deficit, and depleting myself, and kind of beating myself down and pushing myself to the point where I'm exhausted and flat. Then maybe taking a day or 2 days with a higher amount of calories, more carbohydrates, maybe more fats as well, kind of bringing that through the roof, bringing my body back to life, and then repeating the cycle. So kind of going through that wave, that up and down, that cyclical approach seems to produce a really great result. Now, most people when they diet, they would prefer to just be steady, of course, because mentally it's a little bit easier to handle. But let's be honest, think about it. Think about training. We don't have 8-hour workouts, right? We go into the gym and you train really hard for a really short period of time, and then you rest. A workout was to consist of, let's just say, I'm making up a number, 500 reps. In a typical chest workout, let's just say you did 500 reps, and it was done within 60 minutes. You said, well, something, I'm going to do that same volume of work, but instead of doing it in 60 minutes, I'm going to stretch it out over 8 hours. What happens? It's no longer a workout. You just kind of watered it down and turned it into nothing. We get results from training because we push ourselves really hard, overload the body. That overload creates a response. The same is true in dieting. You push your body really hard, push it, then you pull back, as opposed to kind of just doing this. Doing this all the time, I think you're still going to find yourself the overall trend kind of bringing you closer to your goal much faster. It's difficult and it's uncomfortable, but that is definitely what I have found to produce the best result. The only other one I want to talk about is intermittent fasting. I think a lot of people have had success with it when it comes to weight loss. A lot of people say they feel good when they do it. I could only speak to what I've done and what I've experienced, but I could tell you that times when I was prepping for contests, right, I'm consuming 6 meals a day, which would not be possible with intermittent fasting. Depending on your window, well, not even depending on your window, if I'm eating 6 meals a day, and each meal, let's say, has 60 to 70 grams of protein and 15 to 20 grams of fat and 50 or 60 grams of carbohydrates, I couldn't cram that into such a shortened window. I need, from say 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., I need those 12 hours to consume that food quantity. So when people say, well, intermittent fasting works and you just cram it all into that period of time, once you're a certain size bodybuilder, I don't think that's any feasible any longer. And to be totally honest, I've taken a lot of clients who were doing intermittent fasting and they were consuming, I'm making up a number, but let's just say they're consuming 2,500 calories within a, 6-hour or 8-hour time frame. And then you take the same number of calories and you space it out. I understand it's the same amount of calories within a 24-hour period. I'm just telling you though, they seem to get in shape better. It could be that when people do intermittent fasting and they cram all that food at once, maybe once you get so hungry, maybe some of your food choices go out the window, and maybe where the consumption of 2,500 calories was the goal, maybe in actuality that's not what's happening. I'm not sure. All right, I'm just telling you the experience I've had working with clients. Most people just tend to do better when you say, hey, listen, you're gonna wake up, eat something. I've had people argue that. Well, if you take the first number of hours of the day and you fast, blah, blah. Guess what? People, when they get used to eating, when they wake up, they seem to get hungrier. Their metabolism seems to get going. And I'm just telling you what I've seen. I think the more things you can do to bolster a person's metabolism, the greater the success they're going to have in the dieting process. So in summation, I don't believe in veganism. I believe in a consumption of a balanced diet. I like meat. I like animal foods. I like vegetables. I'm not a huge fan of fruit. I'm going to be honest. I think people, when they talk about fruit, I think that the need for that is way exaggerated, because there's nothing that fruits can do that vegetables can't do and do better without all that sugar and all the excess carbohydrates. So I think plenty of animal proteins, I think plenty of vegetables, and I think carbohydrates when needed to hit a certain number of calories and to keep the metabolism sharp. And I think good quality fats, very, very important. And I think if all of that is employed in a cyclical fashion, I think that's the best you're going to do. So I'm not really on board with any of these necessarily, but I think that for someone who, maybe they haven't been dieting at all, probably any one of these, except veganism, just fuck veganism. I shouldn't even say that, because compared to maybe what the average person is eating, a vegan diet, if they are consuming unprocessed stuff, and that's a problem too. A lot of vegans eat a lot of bullshit food, right? Like potato chips could probably technically be vegan, right? But doesn't mean it's a great food to be consuming or to be basing your diet on. So I think the bottom line is, if you stick to whole foods, single ingredient foods, right? A piece of chicken is a single ingredient food. A potato is a single ingredient food. If you make up your diet with foods like that, you're consuming foods that digest well for you, they don't cause you any type of upset, and you're in tune with the number of calories you need to be consuming each day to be in a slight deficit, and you are able to push yourself and cycle those macros, I think that's the absolute best you're going to do. Man, this was a little bit long-winded. I apologize for that, but kind of a lot to say on this subject. Appreciate you guys. Comment below, subscribe, let me know what you want to see, and I'll talk to you soon.